Hello, I'm Pete Devlin. I'm your guest host for this edition of Access Door County on Sevastopol TV. And with me is Ben Rikkola. Am I saying it right?
That's right, correct.
And Ben is instrumental in a recall of two members of the Sevastopol School Board, which is underway right now. Why don't we start with the very beginning? What prompted the need for a recall?
Yeah, sure. First, just my situation. Ben Rikkola, I am a teacher as well. My wife is a longtime teacher at Sevastopol. I have 3 daughters in the district, and this is not a normal thing that's been occurring at Sevastopol lately. And for months, I didn't listen to my own wife, and so I said, it'll all be okay. Keep on keeping on. This is how we were brought up. We're high school sweethearts. We were college sweethearts. We moved here fresh out of college, and we've had a wonderful time in Door County. We've made this our home. And so when she was telling me about stuff, I just said, don't worry about it.
What kind of stuff are we talking about?
Problems, staff morale. I would say we really hit a nice pinnacle a few years ago at Sevastopol. Everything was going great, and sort of the wheels came off the bus, for a lack of a better term. And without going into a lot of details, it kind of is a situation where there's rifts between teachers in the elementary school, and some of those teachers have alliances with the board member. And from the bottom of my heart, I can tell you that the will of the majority is not being carried out at Sevastopol. It's the will of the minority. And I teach about justice and equality and stuff all the time, and how can I teach about that in my career, and then my conscience is telling me one thing, and then, if I teach about Elie Wiesel and indifference, which is the bystander effect, and what he teaches about that, and then so I'm teaching my students this, and then I don't do anything about it myself when it's knocking on my door. I just felt like, I've got to do this. My conscience says cross the threshold. Someone's got to be brave enough to stand up for what is right, for what is just. And so I wasn't even involved in the first recall. I hadn't crossed that threshold yet, and the first recall was Mr. Trent Olson for Jane Lubke and Jay Zahn, and that one sort of fizzled out, and kind of strategically we allowed that to fizzle out because we thought this recall for Bill Beam and Sue Today would be more beneficial. And so that's kind of how I got involved, is through my wife and through things that were being said, teachers that would come to our house. I know a lot of the teachers at Sevastopol. It was, to me, something where it's almost a rule with an iron fist that was happening there. And everyone was so afraid to say or do anything, because what's going to happen to me? There's going to be all these consequences, and there's a whole bunch of stuff, and apparently this goes back years and years and years in some cases, but it all bubbled to the surface just recently. Mary Donaldson, Principal Mary Donaldson, her leave of absence, I would say, was the catalyst or the spark that really got this out there in the public eye and out there for a lot of people, but really it's way more than that. Everyone thinks that it's only about that, and these problems, these rifts, these things that are happening are still happening even after Mary Donaldson has been gone for a couple months now. And so the problem is not cured. Mrs. Donaldson wasn't the problem. It's still there. And
Are there not other administrators who are on the cusp of leaving as well?
I think in the very short-term future, you're going to see some changes that occur at Sevastopol. And the fact of the matter is the board is divided on this. It's 4-3. And so it's not like a parent or citizen group that is against Sevastopol or against the entire board. There's 4 board members who are on board with what this parent and citizen group is doing. And which is, standing up for what is right and just, my dad was a principal, my dad was a superintendent, he started out as a teacher. I've been living through school situations like this all my life, and I can just tell you that this is not normal stuff, how a school should be run, and we just want normalcy. That's all we want. And for 13 years here, that's what Mrs. Rikkola, she teaches 5th grade, and a lot of her folks enjoyed, and now it's like the staff morale is low, the teachers have lost their confidence, no one trusts anybody anymore at school. You just have this feeling of, man, everyone was so happy and clicking on all 8s, not very long ago, and now we just sputter it out to finish the school year. And the teachers are the lifeblood of the school, and it's really unfortunate that so many teachers in the elementary, are on this side, but yet a tiny little faction gets everything they wish for against the will of the majority.
Now, you said you have 4 members of the 7-member school board who at least are sympathetic to your effort. Does that not constitute a majority of the school board? And why are you concerned with recalling the 2 on the other side?
Yeah, this turn just occurred recently. Some of the members got on in April, and that's sort of what started turning this a little bit. And some of those members got in because they were like me. They wanted to cross the threshold to try to turn what was happening there. And so it's recent, and there's, I'll just, I'm not a lawsuit kind of guy or call sheriff's department on people, but that's the type of stuff that's happening. There's people threatening lawsuits, and so most people don't want to stick their neck out there because what am I risking, right? And that's the whole bystander effect that I started with in the beginning. So often the bystander effect is, well, I'm not directly affected enough that I'm not willing to risk. Maybe I'm a business owner, so I have some information, but I don't want to come forward because it's too risky. Maybe I'm a teacher at the school and I have information, but no one's really listening to the information I get. And not only that, I'm getting some retaliation, some repercussion for bringing this forward. Just simple things like, for months and months and months, I'll just call it the old board, told teachers, you cannot talk to board members. You can't send us emails. You can't call us with your concerns. That's illegal. You have to follow the chain of command. And if you did follow the chain of command, then the information seemed to never get there, and it fell on deaf ears, and there was never an attempt. I mean, this is democracy. This is supposed to be what's best for everybody, and to tell so many teachers that their voice doesn't count, you're unworthy of even being listened to not even acknowledge that, and then to do other things, that, like I said, would be almost, you're penalized for doing that. So what a good person should do at Sevastopol is keep your mouth shut and don't say anything. If you question anything, then you're on the chopping block. And that's just the wrong way to run a school, and that's why so many people are crossing that threshold, right? This has been a movement. It's not like there's a group of 5 of us that did this, right? This is a large group of parents and citizens that have crossed that threshold and are saying, I'm doing this because it's right. I can't fight my conscience anymore. I'm willing to stick my neck out there. I'm willing to take that risk because I'm not going to sit idle and just let this happen. These are good people that aren't being treated very well. The problem is mostly in Sevastopol Elementary, and so that's where you get a lot of this. But this has been a movement, and like all movements, they kind of start slow, but then there's a snowball effect to it. And just yesterday, we're working on, so the recall has been submitted to Lisa Beery, the board clerk. Bill and Sue have challenged it, and now we're in the time frame of our rebuttal to their challenge. And so we have 5 days to do that. We'll be done well in advance of that, and then they have another 2 days. And so we're at the rebuttal time, but tons and tons of people came forward yesterday saying, "I'm willing to sign an affidavit." No, that challenge doesn't stand up, and people.
You mean an affidavit that
An affidavit.
it was in fact their signature on the petition? Is that what you're saying?
Well, an affidavit that says, some of the challenges are saying that we misled signers, that they didn't know what they were signing for. And the Wisconsin's statute, see if I can remember this, on recall law 9.10 sub 2M states that it's kind of like voting. No signer can have their name stricken off of the list, off of the recall petition, claiming that they don't have the full information or that they were uninformed. The only way you can do that is if you claim that the circulator misrepresented the reason behind the recall. So essentially, that we tricked you into signing the recall. So it's kind of like voting. Once you vote, you can't wake up the next morning and say, well, I want to change my vote. Once that's on there, you can't say, well, I changed my mind, now I want my name off the list. And so they had a bunch of people, who's ever rallying behind, Bill and Sue, got a lot of people, not a lot, 15, 20, something like that, people to try to take their names off of the list. And we had affidavits to counter that and say, look, here's the sheet, the reasons are right on the recall, I didn't misrepresent this at all, this is why it was signed. And so, the Government Accountability Board in Madison, walked us through, well, how would you meet the challenge? And affidavits are one way that you do that. Have your circulator sign and say, here's what I said, here's what I did. You can't claim that you were uninformed in this. That doesn't stand up. You have to claim misrepresented the purpose of the recall, which we didn't do that. I mean, this is not a group of crazies that are trying for a lynch mob. We literally just want fairness, justice to come back to Sevastopol.
Specifically, what did the recall petition ask?
So 3 reasons were given. It's a tiny spot at the top of the recall. You have to give it one for each person that you're recalling. Lack of transparency was one reason. Inappropriate use of funding was another one. And then broken lines of communication was the last reason. So 3 reasons. In the paper, someone was critical of us saying that these are vague reasons and they don't stand up, but you have to be vague. You can't list 29 specific items there on this. It's a 1-sentence shot that you have to list your reasons, and so and these aren't vague. I mean, lack of transparency can easily be seen in any number of instances where board members say that simple things like, and I've never heard this, I mean, maybe years ago when internet was first coming out, you hear this, but board members would say, just in a recent meeting, I don't think we should publish the board meeting, right, the live board meeting, on the internet for the public to view. And that was a comment that just was like, what else do we have to do to prove lack of transparency? Every school district in the whole area either has their board meeting on live TV or readily available at the school website. You don't have to. What was happening at Sevastopol is you'd have to go and request a copy, and then the tape may or may not be available, and maybe the tape worked or didn't work, and maybe you'd be charged a fee for someone to have to copy that. Every other school just simply puts it there for public availability, And at Sevastopol, they say, I don't think we should do that because with the controversy going on, somebody could get in trouble for defamation. That's my experience is the more people that see it, it keeps everyone more accountable. It keeps everyone maybe from saying some things that are said at a board meeting, but that's the level of accountability we need where it's out there. Everyone's going to see it, and there's nothing hidden. This is open. This is for public view, and that's just one example of proving the lack of transparency that we've seen.
What about the misuse of funds?
Okay, so
That gets the ears perked up.
a local radio station did a Freedom of Information request, I don't know, a month ago, I think the end of April, for how much Sevastopol was spending on lawyers' fees, essentially, and legal guidance and stuff. And it came back to be about $109,000 over the course of a year and a little bit of a time. And a lot of that was investigations that were going on. And so I used the Grafton example. I don't know if people are familiar with that, but in Grafton, Wisconsin, much bigger school, there was a situation where a teacher was put on leave of absence, and essentially the school board, said, yes, he's got to go. And there was such an outpouring of support for that teacher that the public said, wait a second, something's not right here. This is a guy who's been here umpteen years, and there was so much outpouring of support for that teacher that the school board actually said, okay, we might have gotten this one wrong, and they reversed their decision, reinstated the teacher, which made the administrator very mad, and it ended up severing ties. The school board severed ties with the district administrator over that. And that happened in 7 days. In our Sevastopol, this has been allowed to go on for months and months and months and months and months, and it's put everyone through the ringer on both sides. People are exhausted. I said at one board meeting, we forgot to take out the trash on Thursday, put the trash out. That's never happened in 15 years of being here, but you're so consumed by this, and everyone's stressed out and worried, and so many of us, our life's too short. Why should this be doing this? Just, it's not worth it. And 9 times out of 10, I don't get involved in these kind of things. Mm-hmm. Anyone who knows me, I'm low drama. I don't do this kind of thing and ride the waves of highs and lows. I'm very much even keel, and there's so many good people that are just like me, but they're just saying, you know what, we're going to cross the threshold. And many people did it before I got involved. But that would be one example of inappropriate use of school funding, of always having lawyers decide it. In Grafton, they didn't have any lawyers investigate this teacher or that administrator. The board made that decision for themselves. They let the court of public opinion speak loud and clear. They made decisions on their own, and it seems like our board was frozen and timid, and nobody could make a decision until we have legal advice all the time on every little thing. And that's a inept board. You have to make decisions and not let it take so long. You have to be strong in what are your mission statement at Sevastopol, and if those things aren't being followed by whoever, then be strong and go for that. But we simply went for let the lawyers always decide it, which cost Sevastopol literally over $100,000 in the last year and a little bit.
Where does the superintendent fit into all of this? Is the superintendent calling the shots that are
that's a little bit of a tricky situation, but I will say that many teachers that I've known a long time at Sevastopol playing softball with, I used to work at the YMCA, so if anyone is familiar with John Toppy, I kind of feel like the new John Toppy. I used to coach and work at Sturgeon Bay Middle School and high school, so I have experience there. And then I coach out here at Sevastopol for the youth programs, and then I also was employed recently at Southern Door and teach out there. And so this is a network of school ties that I have. And so anyways, at Sevastopol, so many people were saying, you know, the staff morale is down. It's like this iron fist type of rule that we have now. And so when you have that, when there's that type of situation, lack of a better term, iron fist, you know, kind of hovering over the school, people get scared, people get afraid, people get the hint that what it is to be a good person is, you know, don't say anything, don't do anything that might cause somebody to put a reprimand in your file or what have you, right? And so, yeah, it's just not a comfortable feeling. If everyone who's, you know, at some point we've all been in a situation like that, and it's not a good feeling. And so I can't say why, in fact, that feeling came about recently in the last year and a half, 2 years, but we can make assumptions why that happened. And there's been many people like Jerry Warwick, CEO of the hospital, said, you know, in my organization, it doesn't matter whose fault it would be. If this is the culture that comes about, people are going to blame me. People are going to say, you know, we'll start with the top. You're in charge of what type of culture you have there. And so maybe that is what's necessary.
How long has the superintendent been in office here?
I think 2 years, roughly, yeah.
I'm wondering, something you remarked on earlier, the fact the peak in morale being that high occurred perhaps 5 years ago. Isn't that the time that Governor Walker signed Act 10 to take away all the
Yeah,
union?
that seems kind of weird. I would say the peak occurred, that was a low point for a lot of teachers, but you kind of rallied together after that. And that I do want to mention that too, because, you know, the teachers' unions have sort of been annihilated. They're still existent, but they're basically non-existent. And so the situation that you have then is when anything occurs, in the old days, the teacher union would be there to back you and stand up for what is right. And that's not happening now, right? And so the position that teachers are in is you have to be brave enough to stand up for yourself, but then it's the iron fist thing again. If you do stand up for yourself, then there's a target on your back, because that's not what you're supposed to do. And so it's really a tricky situation. In the old days, there would have been union backing that wouldn't allow this to get this far. Nowadays, you have to stand up and fight for yourself, but then you get penalized for that.
We're talking with Ben Rikkola, who is one of those who were involved in the recall drive against 2 members of the Sevastopol School Board. I probably shouldn't use the term against, but of 2 members of the Sevastopol School Board. And the recall petition is moving forward. Let's touch on that for a moment if we can, Ben. Where does it stand? Where does the petition stand at this moment? I know you said that you are in a period now where those who are subject to the recall are responding to your petition. Is that correct?
Yeah, they had a 10-day challenge window, and on the last day they submitted their challenge to the board clerk, Lisa Beery, and then we have a 5-day window to respond to that challenge. Then they will have a 2-day window to reply again to our rebuttal, and then it's time to make the decision of sufficient or insufficient. And so there's 743 signatures that are needed. We submitted roughly 825 for both candidates, for both people being recalled. And so it's this game of trying to get that list down under that number of 743. We maintain that there is sufficiency there. And we've been,
743, if I can interrupt.
Yes.
743 is a percentage of the vote cast in the last gubernatorial election.
25% of everyone who voted in the Sevastopol School District for the last gubernatorial election.
All right. Now, I'm sorry, I interrupted what you were saying. But from that point, the decision is made whether the petitions are sufficient. Then what happens?
Yeah, and so it's actually the board clerk's job to decide on sufficiency or insufficiency. And then if she decides sufficient, then it could be potentially 6 weeks after that date that the recall election would occur.
Sometime probably in August, is that right?
Most likely.
But not as part of the the August primary election, correct?
Well, we were sort of shooting for that date because one thing that happens when people wonder, well, how much is this recall going to cost the taxpayers? And, we had stuff lined up shooting for that August 9th date. But with their challenge, and if they continue to challenge further after we submit our rebuttal, most likely that will prevent us from reaching that August 9th date, and it'll probably be pushed back a couple weeks, 3 weeks after that, somewhere in there.
Have you gotten any fundraising effort underway yet?
Considering
that you might have to pay for the election?
I'm not familiar with that.
Well, I'm suggesting that the municipal clerk will tell you it costs X number of dollars
Right.
to run an election.
Right.
If we're holding an election outside the parameters, i.e. a special election, somebody's got to pay for it. And usually, the municipality is not real keen on doing that. So it falls, I don't think there's any state law that says that you have to pay for it, but again, that would, I'm thinking, with fundraising,
Yeah.
would that ease the burden?
Well, yeah, and I don't, some people are throwing out numbers that it's going to cost 15 or 20,000. I don't think it's going to be anywhere close to that. I've heard other sources say, maybe in the 5 to 7 range. I believe we have 4 townships that would have to have their doors open that day. So it's kind of just getting the ballots ready and having the workers there for that day would be, I think, the biggest cost. I'm sure there's a little bit of other prep work that goes into it as well. And sources have told me that there might be contingency funds available, that each township might realize, this is a big deal, that so many people are involved in this, and they're all citizens of this school district and, in this part of Door County that we live in. And, if each one of them chips in a couple thousand potentially, that maybe that would occur, that there's contingency funds available for things like this. We also have a few individual wealthy folks that I'm sure would probably kitty up if need be, and then we could pay for it that way.
You haven't actually built any kind of a financial structure, but you anticipate that it would be available then?
I think the foundation is there. We haven't pooled together money and all of these things yet, because you still have 6 weeks or what have you after it's decided, and we might as well wait. And the same with our candidates. We haven't declared our candidates because we're sort of holding that card.
That was my next question.
Yeah,
You have
holding
candidates.
that card and if there's an election or not. Why put somebody out there until you know for sure if the election is occurring or not?
The Sevastopol School District, you said, encompasses 4 townships. Other than Sevastopol, what are the other townships?
Egg Harbor, Jacksonport, Sturgeon Bay.
Oh, yes, all right. I wouldn't have thought of town of Sturgeon Bay. I have no further questions. Did I miss anything that you want to talk about?
Well, I'm sure I could think of something. I guess the last reason on the petition was the broken lines of communication.
Okay.
And I don't know that we touched on that one. Just to finish up the cost of the recall, I don't believe that, some citizens were concerned, well, are my taxes going to go up over this? And I don't think that's the case with that. No one's taxes are going to go up. And we've just gotten to this point where we really need to I don't care what happens at the election, but getting to the election will make one thing for sure. The majority will decide it, right? The majority is going to rule, and that's the way we're supposed to work. I said it this way before, that kind of the father of recall in our nation is our former governor of Wisconsin, Robert La Follette. And if you read his stuff, he says, well, the purpose of recall is that the people have the final say, okay? And so another thing that he said is, right, the way that the law is written, that you have to get a significant number of signatures. You have to put the reason on there. If the reasons are blasphemy, people will see that and they won't sign it. If you can't get the 25% of the signatures, then the recall fails. These are the protections that the office holders have, right? But if something bubbles up and gets so bad, then probably it will succeed because there will be enough momentum behind that. And Robert La Follette says, well, when that happens, right, that tells you something. That tells you the will of the people. It's time for a change maybe, right? And so he says the people should have the last say. And so whatever would happen at that election, we can have some certainty that the majority will be deciding what they want. And that's what's most important here, right? This is democracy. Yes, we have a republic where we have elected officials and representatives, but this recall began because all other options were exhausted. It was a last resort. We tried the writing letters thing. Nobody listened. We tried the giving public speeches thing. Nobody listened. We tried making a phone call and saying, please listen to us. Please help us. Please, right? And everyone just said, no. Once the April election occurred, then there was a small little turn that you could see happen. Some new blood got in the board, and a new perspective, and said, wait a minute here, maybe we should be listening to all of these teachers. Maybe we should be listening to these parent concerns instead of keeping it covered and not giving it acknowledgement. At least acknowledge it, right? Don't just put it off and maybe even potentially scold people for bringing this forward. This is America. Justice should prevail. Democracy should prevail. The rule of the majority should prevail. And that's what this recall is going to do. It was a last resort to get certain people's attention and a last resort to execute the will of the majority, which I feel has sadly been ignored for quite some time.
You invoked the name of Bob La Follette.
Yeah.
There is a recurrence of the progressive movement on the national political scene at this moment. And I'm wondering if that might have, the national recurrence would have had an impact on going forward with your petition in Sevastopol.
Not really. That's an interesting concept, but yeah, politics obviously right now in our country is very heated and very divided, and I'm a believer that we need to not have the two-party system anymore in America. It's so dividing. It becomes a rivalry, Sevastopol versus Sturgeon Bay, no matter what. So it doesn't promote open-mindedness. It just promotes going with the status quo all the time. And right, George Washington said it would become this rivalry where it only matters of defeating the other guy So it's almost like you're against the other side and not that you're for something. So I'm a believer. I teach some foreign exchange students once in a while, and there's hardly any other country that we consider a free and democratic country that only has two parties. So many of our other free and democratic nations have 5 or 6 or 7 parties, and then it keeps things more balanced and not just so one versus the other. As far as the progressive thing and having anything to do with this recall, I don't think that was the case. Oftentimes, the law was being used so often, right? And that's where the lawyers came in. And the board members can't talk to the teachers because and hear their concerns because that's violating a policy or that's violating the law. And so at some point, you have to play that game. Well, what can I do under the law then? If all of this is being used against me, I can't do this, I can't do this, I can't do this. At some point, you have to say, I need to play this game that's being played. And that's where our hand was forced. Recall is allowed under the law. Recall is something that has been a long time standing thing from a historically progressive state, Wisconsin. And so maybe history had a little bit to do with that, but I wasn't the one who said recall. That was Trent Olson's idea initially, and some parents who crossed the threshold long before I got involved. And theirs sort of fizzled out, and at that point there was a new group that said, well, Bill and Sue have now been in office. Bill Beam and Sue today have now been in office for a year, and so the law allows a recall of them. And this time I think so many people were afraid to get involved in that first recall, and now they had had enough. It just has gotten to that point where people are finally brave enough to cross the threshold, to not be the bystander anymore, and stick their neck out there and go for it. And so I think we were more or less forced to play this law game, and recall is a law that we could voice our concerns through.
That'd be interesting. In the fall, when you are back before your students, you're going to have a discussion of how I spent my summer?
Well, it's very hard. I mean, that's literally the point that it was this eye-opening point that I was teaching about. Okay, I'm having my students think about the importance of standing up for what's right and what you believe in, and not being the bystander, because so oftentimes that's what people do. We do the path of least resistance. This has been a fascinating study of emotions and psychology as this whole thing has developed. But path of least resistance, says, well, it's easier to not do something. And so that's the danger, though. If you just blindly go along with it, then you're not being a good citizen. Our founding fathers, for as much as they wanted representation, also had a key concept which was called consent of the governed, which means ultimately the people have to provide consent to those representatives. And that's the stage we're at. So many people aren't doing that anymore and are brave enough to do that, where nowadays that's a problem that we have in our country. I think we just say, well, it's politics, we can't fix it, we can't do anything about it, it's just the way it is. And here's the way that I teach it to students is sometimes the biggest change can come from down here and not up here. Sometimes it's actually a grassroots. The change comes from the bottom, not from the top. We're so top down all the time in our way of thinking, that we have leaders and bosses and stuff, but study any movement and the change comes from the bottom down, and the movement gets so big that the people at the top realize, oh, those public opinion has changed, I better change or else I'm not going to have public opinion anymore.
I think that's probably a good point, a good place to stop it. We've been talking with Ben Rikkola, who is instrumental in the attempt to recall 2 members of the Sevastopol School Board this summer. You're watching Access Door County on Sevastopol TV. I'm Pete Devlin. Thank you for watching.